The drill bit crashed to a stop so fast I figured we'd hit bedrock, but Willie's voice buzzing through the comm told a different story. "Control, we got a problem down here. Bit just punched through into nothing. Air pocket maybe? Readings are all over the place." I leaned forward in my chair, watching the monitors flood with data that made no sense. Pressure readings had dropped to almost nothing at depth, like we'd broken through into some kind of cave system, which was crazy at this location. I'd studied the geological surveys for months before we started drilling. "Stephen, you seeing this?" I called across the control room. Stephen Castillo was already heading toward the emergency shutdown, his weathered face tense with worry. "Kill the drill, Willie. Right now." The rig's steady vibration changed as the massive drilling equipment wound down, leaving us with just the background noise of generators and the endless Gulf wind. Stephen grabbed the comm handset, his supervisor instincts kicking in. "All hands. This is Control. We're suspending drilling operations pending equipment check. Nobody goes near the drill site without my say-so." I pulled up the seismic readings on my workstation, trying to make sense of what we'd hit. The data showed a void space extending at least 50 feet in multiple directions from our drill point, not a small air pocket, something much larger. "Paige, what's your read on this?" Stephen asked, though I could tell from his tone he was already planning to seal the hole and call it into corporate. "Give me a minute." I scrolled through the pressure and density readings, cross-referencing them with the geological models I'd built for this site. This shouldn't exist. The seafloor composition here is supposed to be solid sedimentary layers going down at least another 1,000 feet. Willie's voice came through the comm again. "Control, you're going to want to see what came up with the last core sample. Bringing it up now." 20 minutes later, Willie knocked on the control room door, carrying a metal sample tray. His usual calm composure had an edge to it that I'd never seen before. "Take a look at this," he said, setting the tray on my workstation. Mixed in with the expected mud and rock fragments were pieces of worked stone, not natural formations, carved blocks with clean edges and deliberate shapes. I picked up the largest piece, about the size of my fist, and turned it under the desk lamp. "Stephen, look at this." The stone was some kind of limestone, but the surface had been carved with symbols that definitely weren't natural. Geometric patterns that looked almost like writing, though unlike anything I'd seen in my geology courses. "Could be debris from an old shipwreck," Stephen suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "At this depth? And look at the condition. There's no marine growth, no weathering. This stone looks like it was carved yesterday." Willie leaned over my shoulder, examining the carved piece. "My grandfather used to tell stories about finding worked stone in deep water. Said it meant you should stop digging and move on." Before Stephen could respond, we heard the distinctive whop-whop of helicopter rotors approaching the rig. I checked my watch, almost 6 p.m., and we weren't expecting any scheduled flights. "That'll be our geological consultant," Stephen said, though he looked as surprised as I felt. "Corporate said they were sending someone, but I thought it would be tomorrow at the earliest." The helicopter settled onto our landing pad with practiced precision, and a woman in her 60s climbed out, carrying a briefcase and moving with the kind of urgency that made my stomach tighten. She was dressed too formally for rig work, navy blazer and slacks that'd be useless out here, but she walked across the deck like she knew exactly where she was going. Stephen met her at the control room door. "Dr. Williams, I presume?" "Stephen Castillo, rig supervisor." "Dorothy Williams, yes. I need to see your core samples immediately." Her British accent was crisp, professional, but there was something in her eyes that reminded me of a predator that had just caught a scent. I gestured to the sample tray. "We just brought these up. Hit some kind of void space at depth and found worked stone mixed in with the sediment." Dorothy came over to my workstation and grabbed the carved piece I'd been examining. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her breathing quickened, and her grip on the stone tightened until her knuckles went white. "How large is the cavity?" she asked, without looking up from the stone. "Preliminary readings suggest at least 50 feet in multiple directions," I said. "But we haven't done a full survey yet." "We need to get cameras down there tonight." Stephen stepped forward. "Dr. Williams, with respect, we follow safety protocols on this rig. We'll seal the hole and report to corporate before we do anything else." Dorothy finally looked up from the stone, and I saw something in her expression that made me take a step back. Not fear exactly, but a kind of desperate hunger. "Mr. Castillo, I've been monitoring your drilling progress remotely for the past week. This discovery is exactly what we've been looking for." "What do you mean, what you've been looking for?" I asked. Dorothy set the stone down carefully and opened her briefcase, pulling out a folder thick with documents. Classified geological surveys from the 1970s identified several potential sites in this area where deep drilling might encounter unusual structures. Stephen's face darkened. "You're telling me corporate knew we might hit something like this and didn't warn us?" "The surveys were inconclusive. We needed actual drilling data to confirm the presence of artificial structures." "Artificial structures?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "You're talking about archaeology at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico?" Dorothy spread several photos across my workstation, black and white shots that looked like they'd been taken decades ago. They showed carved stone blocks similar to what we'd just brought up, along with what looked like parts of buildings, walls maybe, or foundations. These were taken at a drilling site off the Louisiana coast in 1973, Dorothy explained. The operation was shut down after they encountered a large cavity system containing worked stone structures. Willie had stayed silent during this back and forth, but now he stepped closer to check out the photos. His face turned white as he looked them over. "My grandfather worked that rig," he said quietly. "Never talked much about what they found, but he always said they should have left it alone." Dorothy's attention snapped to Willie with laser focus. "Your grandfather was on the Pelican Station crew? You know about that?" "I know they found something significant before the project was terminated." "What did he tell you?" Willie glanced at Stephen, then back at Dorothy. "Just that they drilled into something that wasn't supposed to be there. Said the stonework was too old and too perfect for anything that should exist at that depth." I grabbed one of Dorothy's photographs, looking over the carved blocks. The symbols were different from what we'd found, but the style was clearly similar. "How many sites like this have been discovered?" "This would be the 4th confirmed location," Dorothy said. "Each one has shown evidence of large-scale construction using advanced stone-working techniques." Stephen crossed his arms. "Advanced according to who? And why wasn't any of this in our briefing materials?" "Because the previous sites were all sealed and classified after preliminary investigation. This is the first time we've had the technology and resources to conduct a proper exploration." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Gulf wind. "You're talking about exploring an underwater archaeological site with drilling equipment. That's not what we're equipped for." "Actually, it's exactly what you're equipped for. Your rig has the most advanced deep-water camera systems in the fleet, and your drilling apparatus can be modified to provide access points for detailed investigation." Stephen shook his head. "Dr. Williams, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but my job is to keep this crew safe. We're not archaeologists, and we're not equipped for whatever you're proposing." Dorothy shut her briefcase with a sharp snap. "Mr. Castillo, This discovery could rewrite our understanding of human civilization in the Americas. We are talking about buildings that are thousands of years older than anything we know existed in this region. Then call in the archaeologists and the Navy. We're oil workers. There isn't time for proper channels. Other drilling operations in the area are getting close to similar discoveries. If we don't investigate this site immediately, we'll lose the opportunity to study it properly. I looked at the stone fragment again, running my fingers over the carved symbols. The craftsmanship was incredible, precise geometric patterns that would have needed sophisticated tools and planning. What kind of structures are we talking about? Buildings? Foundations? Dorothy hesitated, then pulled out one more photograph. This one showed what looked like a staircase carved from stone, going down into darkness beyond the camera's range. Based on the previous sites, we believe you've broken into a much larger complex, possibly a ceremonial center or administrative facility. Willie let out something that might have been a laugh, but it held no humor. My grandfather called them the stairs that go down forever. Said once you start following them, you can't find your way back up. That's folklore, Mr. Payne. What we're dealing with is archaeology. Maybe, Willie said. But my grandfather was a practical man, and he was scared enough of what they found to never work deep water again. Stephen glanced at his watch, then at the darkening sky outside. Dr. Williams, it's getting late, and we need to secure the drill site. Whatever investigation you want to do will have to wait until morning. Actually, nighttime would be ideal for camera work. Less surface interference, and the artificial lighting will provide better contrast for the stone structures. I felt the carved stone's smooth surface and realized I was holding something that might be older than recorded history. The scientist in me was fascinated, but Willie's grandfather's warnings echoed in my mind. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Dorothy smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely excited rather than urgently driven. We lower cameras into the cavity and document whatever structures are down there. Simple reconnaissance to determine the scope and significance of the find. Stephen was already shaking his head, but I found myself considering it. The discovery was unprecedented, and the chance to be part of something this important was exactly why I'd chosen geology over a safe office job. Just cameras, I said. No personnel, no modifications to our equipment beyond what's necessary for the camera deployment. Agreed, Dorothy said quickly. Just cameras. Stephen looked between us, obviously not liking where this was going. And if we find something we can't handle safely? Then we document it thoroughly and turn everything over to the appropriate authorities, Dorothy said. Willie gathered up the stone samples, handling them with care. I'll prep the camera rig, he said. But I'm telling you now, my grandfather's stories didn't end well for folks who went looking for answers in places like this. As Willie left the control room, Dorothy began spreading more documents across my workstation. Technical specs, survey maps, and what appeared to be preliminary archaeological assessments. She'd come prepared for this discovery in a way that suggested she'd known exactly what we were going to find. Dr. Williams, I said, how long have you been expecting us to hit this site? She looked up from her papers, and for just a moment, I saw something in her expression that made me think Willie's grandfather might have been right to be scared. Long enough to know that what you found down there has been waiting for us to discover it. The morning sun felt different on my face as I walked across the deck toward the equipment staging area. Maybe it was just the lack of sleep, but everything seemed sharper somehow. The salt spray, the constant buzz of the generators, even the way the metal deck plates rang under my boots. Willie was already there, checking the submersible probe's camera housing with the kind of careful attention he usually saved for critical equipment. But his hands weren't quite steady, and I caught him stopping between tasks like he was listening for something. "You okay?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug next to his toolkit. He looked up, and I caught something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but the kind of caution you'd have around a piece of equipment that had given you a shock once. "Been having the strangest dreams," he said, turning back to the camera housing. "Dark water, stone steps going down and down. Probably just my brain trying to make sense of what we found yesterday. Probably. But I remembered my own restless night, filled with images of carved symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them." Stephen's voice drifted across the deck as he walked over with Dorothy, and from his tone, they'd been going at it since dawn. "Dr. Williams, I understand your enthusiasm, but we follow safety protocols on this rig. Remote observation first, then we evaluate." Dorothy walked beside him with that same urgent energy she'd had since stepping off the helicopter. "Mr. Castillo, cameras can't give us the kind of detailed analysis we need. Human observation, the ability to make real-time decisions about what to investigate. Human observation of an unstable underwater cavity that we know nothing about." Stephen stopped next to our equipment setup, his supervisor instincts clearly at war with whatever pressure Dorothy was applying. "We send the probe down first. That's final." I finished connecting the camera's power cable to the winch system. "The probe will give us a complete picture of what we're dealing with. If it's safe for human exploration, we can discuss next steps." Dorothy opened her mouth to argue, but Elaine's voice came through the deck speakers. "Control to deck crew. I'm getting some weird readings on the communications array. Interference patterns I've never seen before." Willie looked up from the probe housing. "What kind of interference?" "Hard to describe. It's not random static. There's a pattern to it, almost like a pulse. Started about 10 minutes ago and it's getting stronger." Stephen grabbed his radio. "Elaine, is this messing with our safety communications?" "Not yet, but it's definitely centered on our location. Whatever's causing it is coming from directly below us." I felt that chill again, the same one I'd gotten when Dorothy first shared those photographs with us. "Let's get the probe in the water. Maybe the interference has something to do with the cavity." Willie sealed the camera housing and ran through his final checks while Stephen and I positioned the winch over the drill hole. The probe itself was about the size of a briefcase, loaded with cameras, lights, and sensors that could give us a complete picture of what was down there. "Probe is ready for deployment," Willie announced, though he kept glancing at the drill hole like it might bite him. "Lower away," Stephen ordered. The winch motor buzzed as the probe went down, its cable vanishing into the black water of the drill hole. On the monitor we'd set up on deck, the camera feed showed the usual sight of the rig's underwater support structure, then open water, then the jagged walls of the hole we'd drilled. 50 feet, Willie called out, watching the depth gauge. 75, 100. The probe's lights lit up the walls of our drill hole, showing the expected layers of sediment and rock. But as we got close to the depth where we'd broken through, the walls suddenly opened up into empty space. "There," I said, pointing at the monitor. "We're in the cavity." The probe's lights swept across what the camera showed, and I heard Dorothy's sharp breath behind me. The cavity wasn't just an empty space, it was clearly man-made. Smooth walls curved away from our entry point, and directly below the probe, carved from what looked like black stone, was a staircase. "Jesus," Stephen muttered. "Look at the workmanship on that." The stairs were flawless, not just well-built, but geometrically exact in a way that would have needed advanced tools and careful planning. Each step was identical, carved from the same dark stone, and they dropped into the blackness beyond our light's reach. Willie was staring at the monitor with an expression I couldn't figure out. That's exactly what I saw in my dreams, every detail. Dreams can be influenced by recent experiences, Dorothy said, but her voice had that hungry quality again. The mind processes new information during sleep. Lower the probe, I said. Let's see how far down this goes. As the probe moved down beside the staircase, Elaine's voice came through the speakers again. The interference is getting stronger. It's pulsing in rhythm with the probe's descent. Every time you go deeper, the pattern intensifies. I watched the depth gauge climb. 200 feet, 250, 300. The staircase just kept going, each step the same as the last, carved with that same perfect precision. This is incredible, I said, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. The engineering required to build something like this underwater. It wasn't built underwater, Dorothy interrupted. This predates the current sea level. These structures were built on dry land, then submerged when the ice caps melted. Stephen made a face. How long ago are we talking about? Based on the North Sea discovery, potentially 12 to 15,000 years. Pre-Columbian by millennia. Willie made that sound again, the one that wasn't quite a laugh. My grandfather used to say some things are old enough that they remember when the world was different. The probe reached 400 feet, and suddenly the staircase opened up into something much larger. The camera's lights swept across what looked like a huge chamber, with more staircases visible in the distance, leading in directions that made my head hurt to think about. How big is this place? Stephen asked. I checked the probe's sonar readings. The chamber goes at least 200 feet in every direction from where we are. Maybe more. We're hitting the edge of what our sensors can reach. Dorothy moved closer to the monitor, her eyes focused on the stone buildings below. I worked on a similar find in the North Sea 20 years ago. Offshore drilling platform hit a cave system with carved stone structures. You never mentioned that yesterday, Stephen said. The project was classified. We found staircases, chambers, carved symbols, very similar to what you've discovered here. What happened to that site? I asked. Dorothy hesitated. The crew stopped drilling after their equipment kept breaking down. The site was sealed and marked as geologically unstable. Willie looked up from the winch controls. Equipment problems like what we're dealing with on the comms? Among other things. Elaine's voice crackled through the speakers, more urgent now. The interference just spiked. Whatever's causing it, the probe is getting close to the source. On the monitor, the probe's lights showed more of the huge chamber. The construction was unlike anything I'd seen, not just the staircases, but carved pillars and what might have been doorways leading to other rooms. Everything was made from the same black stone, and everything was perfectly preserved. This is the greatest archaeological discovery in human history, Dorothy said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're looking at a civilization that existed before recorded history, with construction techniques we can barely understand. Stephen crossed his arms. And we're looking at it with a remote probe, which is exactly how we should be handling something this unknown. A probe can't provide the kind of detailed analysis. Dr. Williams, I've heard your arguments. We're not sending people down there until we understand what we're dealing with. I was about to agree with Stephen when something on the monitor caught my eye. In the darkness beyond the probe's lights, something had moved. Just a shadow, but it looked intentional, like it knew we were watching. Willie, Can you pan the camera to the left? He adjusted the probe's position, and the beams moved across more of the room. Vacant stairways, carved walls, flawless stone construction. Nothing stirring. What did you see? Dorothy asked. Probably nothing. Just thought I caught movement in the shadows. But as I said it, I saw it again. A shadow that didn't match the probe's lighting, moving between the distant staircases with what looked like purpose. There, I said, pointing at the monitor. Did you see that? Stephen leaned closer to the screen. See what? The shadow had vanished, but I knew what I'd spotted. Something was down there with the probe. Something that didn't want to be seen clearly. We need to seal this hole and report to corporate, Stephen said. This is beyond our capabilities. We're on the verge of rewriting human history, Dorothy argued. You can't just seal this up and walk away. Watch me. The interference suddenly stopped. Elaine's voice came through the speakers, clear and surprised. The interference just cut out completely. All readings are back to normal. On the monitor, the probe's camera showed the staircase continuing down into what appeared to be an even larger chamber. The stone walls stretched away in all directions, perfectly preserved and very old. And in the new silence, with the interference gone, I could swear I heard something else coming through the probe's audio feed. Something that sounded almost like voices, calling from the depths below. The diving bell dropped through the black water with a steady mechanical beat that should have been reassuring but somehow felt wrong. I glanced at my depth gauge, 50 feet and still going down, while trying to ignore how Willie kept flipping that small metal thing around in his fingers. You've been quiet since we suited up, I said through the comm system. Willie glanced up, and I saw something in his expression that reminded me of yesterday when he'd first seen those carved stones. Just thinking about what my grandfather used to say about deep water. Some places aren't meant for people. It's an archaeological site, Willie. Stone and water, nothing more. But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely convinced. The water outside our lights looked darker than it should be at this depth, and our descent felt different somehow. Too smooth, like something was pulling us down rather than gravity doing the work. 75 feet, I called up to the surface. Visibility is good, no structural issues with the bell. Stephen's voice crackled back through the comm. Copy that. Dr. Williams wants to know your ETA to the chamber entrance. I turned to Willie, who was still messing with something in his hands. What's that? He held up a small piece of metal, tarnished with age but clearly worked by human hands. My grandfather's good luck charm. He carried it on every dive after 1952. 52, that's when his crew found structures like this in the Gulf, yeah. 3 men went missing before they sealed the site and walked away. Willie tucked the charm back into his suit pocket. He never talked much about what happened, but he always said this little piece of metal was the only reason he made it back to the surface. Dorothy's voice crackled through the comm, sharp with impatience. How much longer until you reach the entrance? I checked our depth again. Another minute, maybe 2. We're at 150 now. Excellent. Remember, I need detailed documentation of any symbols or architectural features you encounter. Stephen's voice came right after. And remember, if anything feels unsafe, you come back up. No discovery is worth risking crew. The diving bell's lights suddenly lit up the staircase we'd seen on the probe footage, and I felt my breath catch. Seeing it through a camera was one thing, but being here in person made the scale and precision of the construction hard to ignore. Each step was identical, carved from that same black stone with mathematical perfection. Jesus, Willie muttered. It's exactly like the pictures in my grandfather's journal. Your grandfather kept a journal? detailed notes about every job he worked. The Gulf incident got 3 full pages, most of it warnings about what they found down there. We walked down the staircase, our lights showing more of the amazing stonework. No tool marks, no bumps or rough spots, just smooth black stone that looked like it had been shaped by something way more advanced than anything that should have existed thousands of years ago. 200 feet, I announced. I can see the bottom of the staircase. And there it was, a massive doorway carved directly into what looked like a solid stone wall. The opening was at least 12 feet high and 8 feet wide, framed by more of those same symbols we'd found in the drill samples. But these were bigger, more detailed, arranged in patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking straight at them. "Surface, we've reached the entrance," I reported. The doorway is massive, definitely artificial construction. The symbol work is incredible. Dorothy's voice came back immediately. "Can you see into the room beyond?" I pointed our lights through the doorway, and what I saw made me understand why Willie's grandfather had been scared enough to carry a good luck charm for the rest of his life. The room beyond was huge. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. More staircases were visible in the distance, but these didn't just go up and down. Some seemed to curve in directions that hurt to think about, while others appeared to cross each other in ways that broke basic geometry. "Willie, are you seeing this?" He was pressed against the bell's viewing port, staring into the chamber with a look I couldn't figure out. My grandfather drew pictures of this exact place, every detail. That's impossible. He couldn't have seen this specific site. Maybe they're all the same. Maybe whoever built these things used the same design everywhere. Elaine's voice crackled through the comm from the surface. "I'm getting massive electromagnetic readings from your location. Whatever's down there is putting out energy signatures I've never seen before." Dorothy's voice cut in again, urgent and demanding. "You need to go inside that chamber. The probe footage doesn't give us enough detail for proper analysis." Stephen's response was immediate. "No way. They document from the entrance and come back up." "Mr. Castillo, I'm ordering them to proceed with interior investigation. And I'm ordering them to stay put until we understand what we're dealing with." I looked at Willie, who was still staring into the chamber. The water around us had gone completely still, which made no sense given the strong currents we'd faced on our way down. It was like the doorway existed in its own pocket of calm water. "Willie, what did your grandfather's journal say about going inside?" He turned away from the viewing port, and I caught the fear in his eyes. Real fear, the kind that comes from knowing something terrible's about to happen. He said the 3 men who disappeared went inside to investigate. They were experienced divers, good men who knew how to handle themselves underwater. But something in there called to them, and they just kept going deeper until their air ran out and they couldn't find their way back. Dorothy's voice came through the comm again, more urgent this time. "The electromagnetic readings show active technology inside that chamber. This could be the biggest archaeological find in human history. Or it could be what killed 3 experienced divers 70 years ago," Willie said, though he was speaking to me rather than the comm. I directed our lights deeper into the chamber, trying to make sense of the layout. The staircases seemed to connect to platforms and walkways that stretched into the darkness, all carved from the same perfect black stone. But there was something else, a faint glow coming from somewhere deeper in the structure. Too dim to identify, but definitely there. "Surface. There's some kind of light source in the chamber. Very faint, but it's not coming from our equipment." Stephen's voice was tight with worry. "What kind of light?" "Hard to say. Blue-white, maybe. Could be phosphorescence or some kind of mineral deposit." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. The glow had a quality that reminded me of electricity, though that was impossible in a building this old. Dorothy's voice cut through my thoughts. "You need to investigate that light source. It could be evidence of preserved technology." "Dr. Williams," Stephen said, "they're not going in there." "Mr. Castillo, I have authority over this investigation. If you continue to obstruct, then you can find yourself another crew." Willie still held his grandfather's charm, rolling it between his fingers. "Paige, there's something else my grandfather wrote about these places. He said the water around them gets different when you get too close. Calmer, but wrong somehow." I looked out at the perfectly still water surrounding our diving bell. No current, no movement, just an unnatural quiet that stretched as far as our lights could reach. "Like this?" "Exactly like this." I made my decision. "Surface. We're going to move closer to the entrance for better documentation, but we're staying out of that chamber." "Negative," Stephen said immediately. "You maintain current position." "I need better images of the symbol work," I argued. "We can get close enough for detailed photography without actually going inside." Dorothy's voice cut through the air. "Excellent. Proceed with close-range documentation." Willie shot me a look like I'd just suggested swimming with sharks. "Paige, my grandfather's journal was very specific about not getting too close to the entrance. We'll be careful. Just close enough for good photos. Then we come back up." But as I guided the diving bell toward the huge doorway, Willie reached out and touched the stone frame through the bell's mechanical arm. The moment his equipment made contact with the carved stone, the water around us began to glow. Not the weak light we'd seen from deeper in the chamber, but a bright blue radiance that seemed to come from the water itself. It started at the spot where Willie had touched the door frame and spread outward like ripples, lighting up the entire entrance and showing details of the symbol work that our lights had missed. "Surface," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've got a situation down here." The glow grew stronger, and in its light, I could see that the symbols carved into the door frame weren't just decorative. They were moving, changing, and rearranging themselves in patterns that made my eyes water to follow. And from somewhere deep within the chamber, carried by water that shouldn't be able to carry sound, came something that sounded almost like voices. The chamber spread out ahead of us like something from a nightmare, all black stone and weird angles that made my head ache just looking at them. Willie and I waded through the water slowly, our flashlights slicing through the gloom to show room after room carved from the same flawless material. "This doesn't make any sense," I said, directing my beam toward a staircase that seemed to curve upward and downward at the same time. "The engineering required to create something like this underwater." "It wasn't built underwater," Willie interrupted, his voice tight through the comm. "My grandfather's journal is real specific about that. These places were built on dry land. Then the water came later." I watched him pull out that small metal thing again, checking it like a compass. "You've been reading his journal this whole time?" "Every night since we found those first stones. Figured I better know what we were dealing with." He paused at the entrance to another chamber, this one filled with staircases that intersected in ways that violated basic physics. He wrote about rooms just like this, called them doorways that should never be opened. The water around us carried our lights further than expected, revealing carved walls that stretched beyond what we could see. Every surface was covered in those geometric symbols, but these were different from what we'd found at the entrance. More complex, arranged in patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking straight at them. "Look at this," I said, swimming closer to examine a series of carved panels. "These aren't just decorative, they're telling a story. The images showed human-like figures walking down staircases just like the ones we were on. But as the story went on, the figures changed, turning into something else. Something that still looked human, but felt wrong somehow. Willie came over to the wall, his light joining mine. My grandfather drew pictures of these exact carvings, said they showed what happened to people who went too deep. Dorothy's voice came through our comm, sounding more urgent than before. What are you finding down there? I need detailed descriptions of any symbolic representations.
Carved panels showing human figures, I reported. Appears to be some kind of narrative sequence. Excellent. You need to proceed deeper into the complex. Find the central chamber. Willie looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. How does she know there's a central chamber? Before I could answer, Dorothy's voice came through again, and this time she sounded different. Desperate. I've been part of a government task force studying these sites for decades. We know the basic layout from previous discoveries. Stephen's voice cut through immediately, sharp with anger. Dr. Williams, you said this was your first direct investigation. The situation has evolved beyond our initial parameters. Paige and Willie need to reach the central chamber before... Before what? Stephen demanded. But Dorothy had gone quiet, leaving us floating in the dark water with more questions than answers. The glow we'd been following was getting brighter as we moved deeper into the complex, and I could see it was coming from somewhere ahead of us, through a series of connected chambers that seemed to stretch endlessly forward. Surface. We need to discuss our air situation, I said, checking my gauge. We're using more than expected down here. Stephen's voice came back immediately. How much do you have left? 40 minutes, maybe less. The water pressure is different than our calculations suggested. Then you come up now. No discussion. But as I said it, Elaine's voice crackled through the comm, strained with worry. I'm getting reports from other rigs. 3 platforms in the Atlantic have gone completely silent in the past hour. No communication. No emergency signals. What kind of rigs? Willie asked. Deep drilling operations, all of them working at depths similar to ours. I felt that chill again. The one that had been following me since we'd first found those carved stones. Dorothy, what aren't you telling us? No answer. Willie was swimming ahead of me now, following the bright light through another chamber filled with those crazy staircases, but he stopped suddenly at a point where 4 different stairways met, creating a kind of intersection in the middle of empty water. Paige, you need to see this. I joined him at the intersection, and my breath caught. Carved into the stone where the staircases met were fresh symbols. Not old like everything else we'd seen, but new, recent. The stone around them was still uneven, like someone had been working on them just days ago. These weren't here when the probe came through, I said. Willie was pulling something out of his suit pocket. A small, worn journal wrapped in waterproof material. My grandfather drew these same symbols. Look. He opened the journal to a page covered in careful sketches and notes, written in a mixture of English and Spanish. The symbols were identical, down to the smallest detail. What do the notes say? Willie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Los que esperan abajo. Those who wait below. He wrote that these symbols show up when the sleepers start to wake up. The carved symbols pulsed now, bright with the same blue glow we'd been following. But as we watched, the brightness started to fade, like something was sucking the power right out of it. And from the deeper chambers, beyond where our lights could reach, came the sound of movement. Not the random drift of underwater currents, but something purposeful, something that knew we were there. "Surface," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're coming up now." But as we turned to go, something in the black depths moved closer, and I knew that whatever had been sleeping down here for thousands of years had finally decided to wake up. The footage played back on Elaine's monitor for the third time, and I still couldn't make sense of what we'd captured down there. Those stone panels with human figures changing into something else, the new symbols that matched Willie's grandfather's journal, the way the water had lit up when we touched that rock. None of it made sense with anything I'd learned in 8 years of geology. "Pause it there," Dorothy said, leaning closer to the screen. "That symbol sequence on the left panel." I froze the image where our lights had lit up a series of geometric carvings. Dorothy pulled out a tablet and started comparing the footage to files I hadn't seen before. "How long have you been studying these sites?" Stephen asked. His voice carried that edge it got when he was trying to stay professional while wanting to throw someone overboard. Dorothy didn't look up from her tablet. "Since 1987. That's when the task force was formed." "What task force?" She finally met his eyes, and I saw something there that made my stomach drop. Joint operation between the U.S. Geological Survey, the Navy, and 3 other agencies I can't name. We've been tracking strange deep-sea discoveries for 36 years. Willie looked up from his grandfather's journal, which he'd been reading since we'd surfaced. "You knew we'd find this." "We knew someone would find it eventually. Deep drilling technology has advanced to the point where these sites were becoming accessible whether we wanted them to be or not." Stephen shot up so fast his chair scraped against the deck plating. "You used us as test subjects." "We used you as the best drilling crew in the Gulf, working for a company with the equipment and expertise to handle what we might find." Dorothy's voice stayed level, but I caught that hungry quality again. "This discovery is too important to leave to chance encounters." I wound the footage back to the intersection where we'd found the fresh carvings. These symbols weren't there when the probe went down. Something carved them while we were in the chamber. "That's impossible," Elaine said. "We would have seen movement on the monitors." Willie held up his journal, open to a page covered in sketches and notes. "My grandfather wrote about this, said the symbols would appear when people got close enough to wake up what was sleeping down there." Dorothy moved to look at the journal, and Willie pulled it back protectively. "What exactly did your grandfather write down about the 1952 incident?" "Enough to know you people never learn." Willie flipped through several pages. "Here, July 15th, 1952. The voices started on the 3rd day after we opened the chamber. Quiet at first, like whispers carried up through the water. By the 5th day, they were calling our names. The deck went quiet except for the steady buzz of generators and the sound of waves against the rig's supports. I felt that chill again, the one that had been following me since we'd first brought up those carved stones." "Voices?" Stephen asked. Willie kept reading. "Martinez went down to check the equipment on day 6. Said he could hear them clear as day, speaking Spanish, telling him to come deeper into the chambers. We pulled him up, but he kept trying to go back down. Had to restrain him." Dorothy was jotting down notes on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "What happened to Martinez?" "Walked into the ocean on day 7. Never found his body." Willie closed the journal. "That's when they decided to seal the site and walk away." Elaine's voice crackled through the comm system from the communications room. "I'm getting reports from other drilling operations. 17 sites worldwide showing similar electromagnetic interference patterns, all starting within the past month." I turned to Dorothy. "How many sites are there total?" "We've identified 43 potential locations based on geological surveys and historical incident reports. 17 are currently being drilled by various companies." "And you didn't think to warn any of them?"
We warned the ones we could control. The others, Dorothy shrugged. Some discoveries are too important to prevent. Stephen paced back and forth, his boots thudding against the deck plating. You're talking about people's lives. I'm talking about rewriting human history. These structures predate known civilization by thousands of years. The technology required to build them, the implications for our understanding of human development. The people who built them are gone, I interrupted. Have been for millennia. Dorothy looked at me with an expression I couldn't figure out. Are they? Before anyone could respond, Elaine's voice came through the comm again, tight with worry. I'm losing contact with the Atlantic sites. 3 platforms have gone completely dark in the past hour. Willie was leafing through his journal again, stopping at a page near the back. My grandfather's last entry about the Gulf site. The voices aren't human. They're old, older than anything that should still be alive. They remember when the world was different, and they want it back. I walked over to the core samples we'd brought up earlier, the pieces of carved stone that had started this whole thing. They sat in a metal tray under the work lights, but something had changed about them now. These stones are warm, I said, touching one carefully. They weren't warm this morning. Dorothy came over to the sample tray, and I noticed her hands trembling a bit as she grabbed the biggest piece. The electromagnetic interference is getting to them. They're picking up signals from the chamber downstairs. What kind of signals? Communication. The structures aren't just buildings, they're a network. Each site is connected to the others through some kind of technology we don't understand. The stone in my hand had gotten warm, and I could swear I felt something moving through it, like a slow rhythm. Connected how? We're still trying to figure that out, but the timing isn't coincidental. 17 sites becoming active simultaneously suggests coordination. Willie stood up, gripping his journal tight. My grandfather wrote about this too. Said the voices told Martinez they'd been waiting for the right time, when enough doorways could be opened at once. The sun was setting now, painting the Gulf waters red and orange. In a few hours it would be completely dark, and I found myself dreading what might happen then. The interference had been stronger at night, and something about the approaching darkness made me nervous. We need to seal this site, Stephen said. Whatever's down there, we're not equipped to handle it. We can't seal it, Dorothy replied. Not anymore. The process has already started. What process? But before she could answer, a sound came up from the drill hole. Not the mechanical noise of equipment or the random sounds of water and metal. This was different, intentional. Footsteps, on stone, coming up from below. Willie dropped his journal and I heard him whisper something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. The footsteps grew louder, bouncing up through the water with a rhythm that matched the pulse I felt in the stone sample. Dorothy, I said, my voice barely steady. What aren't you telling us? She was staring at the drill hole, her face pale in the fading light. I've been in contact with teams at the other sites. 3 crews reported seeing figures moving in their chambers yesterday. All 3 platforms went dark 6 hours later. The footsteps were joined by something else now. Voices, distant but growing clearer, speaking in words that seemed to pulse through the water itself. Willie grabbed his journal with trembling hands and flipped to the final pages. Day 8, he read aloud. They're coming up the stairs. All of them. We can hear them calling in words that hurt to understand, promising things that make the men weep. God help us. We should never have opened the door. The voices from below were getting louder, and as night fell around me, I could swear they were starting to sound almost like people I knew.
The voices had been getting stronger all night, threading through my dreams until I couldn't tell if I was asleep or awake. By the time dawn broke over the gulf, turning the water that sick orange color it gets sometimes, I knew they weren't just random sounds anymore. They were calling my name. Not in English. The language was something older, with consonants that seemed to move through the water itself. But somehow I understood exactly what they were saying. Paige. Come down to us, Paige. We've been waiting. I stood at the rail watching the sunrise, trying to convince myself it was just my brain processing stress in weird ways. But every time the breeze stopped, I could hear them again, floating up from the drill hole like voices carried on the current. You hear them too. I turned to find Dorothy standing behind me, still wearing that navy blazer even though it was totally wrong for rig work. Her hair was messier than yesterday, and there were dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept either. How do you know what I'm hearing? She moved to stand beside me at the rail, looking down at the water. Because they called to me the same way 20 years ago, in the North Sea, when we first opened one of these sites. And 3 members of that crew walked into the ocean over the course of a week, just stepped off the platform in the middle of their shifts, and kept walking until the water closed over their heads. Dorothy's voice was flat, matter of fact. We found their bodies later, but they all had the same expression. Peaceful. Like they'd finally found what they were looking for. I felt that cold feeling again, the one that had been with me since we'd brought up those first carved stones. Why didn't you tell us this yesterday? Would you have believed me? Before I could answer, Stephen's voice boomed across the deck. All hands, prepare for concrete pour. We're sealing this hole and getting the hell out of here. I watched him direct Willie and 2 other crew members as they set up the concrete mixer over the drill site. Stephen had been awake all night too, walking the deck and checking equipment, but now he moved with the sharp focus of someone who'd made up his mind and wasn't budging. This won't work, Dorothy said quietly. Why not? Because they don't want to be sealed in anymore. The concrete poured down into the drill hole in a steady gray stream, and for a few minutes I thought maybe Stephen was right. Maybe we could just fill the cavity and walk away from whatever was down there. But then Willie called out from the mixer controls, "Stephen, we got a problem. The concrete's not setting." I moved closer to the drill hole and saw what he meant. The concrete was breaking apart as soon as it touched the water, crumbling like something was eating it away. Within minutes, the gray mixture had completely disappeared, leaving the hole as open as before. "Try a different mixture," Stephen ordered. Already did. 3 different formulations. Same result every time. Dorothy was scrolling through her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm getting reports from the other sites. Same thing happening everywhere. The concrete won't hold." Willie grabbed his grandfather's journal again, turning to pages near the back that I hadn't seen him look at before. His hands shook as he found what he was looking for. "Listen to this," he said. Day 9. Tried to seal the opening with cement and steel. The water turned it to powder before it could set. Martinez says they don't want to be trapped anymore, that they've been waiting too long to let us close the door now. "What happened on day 10? I asked. Willie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Martinez walked into the ocean, then Rodriguez, then Captain Hebert. By day 12, only 3 of us were left. Elaine's voice crackled through the deck speakers, tight with worry. "I'm detecting massive movement in the chamber below. Something big is climbing the staircases." I checked the depth readings on her monitor. Whatever was moving down there was huge, easily the size of a building,
and it was rising steadily through the chamber system we'd explored yesterday. "How is that possible?" Stephen asked. "The structures aren't just buildings," Dorothy said. "They're part of something larger. A civilization that's been waiting beneath the ocean for thousands of years." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to open enough doorways for them to return." The stone samples on the equipment table were glowing brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with whatever was moving below us. I could feel the heat from them even standing several feet away. "Dorothy," I said, "how long have you been hearing the voices?" She looked at me with those sharp blue eyes, and I saw something in them that made my stomach twist. "Every day for 20 years. They never stop calling once they know you're listening." "And you came here anyway?" "I came here because they told me to." Stephen spun around to face her. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I've been working for them longer than I've been working for the government. They needed someone to find the sites, to coordinate the drilling operations, to make sure enough doorways were opened at the same time." Willie backed away from Dorothy, gripping his grandfather's journal tight to his chest. "You're one of them." "Not yet, but I will be soon." The water around the rig was changing color, turning from the usual blue-green of the Gulf to something darker, almost black. And just below the surface I could see shapes moving. They looked like people, but something was off about them, like shadows that had learned to swim. "Stephen," I said, "we need to call for evacuation. Now." He was already heading toward the communications room, but Dorothy's voice stopped him. "The external systems won't work. I shut down the satellite uplinks 3 days ago." "You what?" "The voices told me to. They said outside interference would complicate the process." Stephen's face went red with anger. "You messed with our emergency communications?" "Only the external ones. The internal rig monitoring systems still function perfectly." Elaine's voice crackled through the speakers again, pitched higher now. "Whatever's down there just passed the 200-foot mark. It's picking up speed." I felt it now, a tremor running up through the rig's frame. Not the steady pulse of our equipment, but something alive, like a giant heart beating deep in the water. The voices grew louder too, no longer soft murmurs but clear calls in that old language that somehow clicked perfectly in my mind. They sounded excited, eager, offering things that lit up corners of my brain with ideas I couldn't quite catch hold of. "We need to get off this rig," Willie said. "Right now." But as he spoke, the water around us exploded. Something enormous burst through the surface right under the drill hole, sending shockwaves through the rig that threw me to my knees. Water poured across the deck as a huge tower of black stone rose from the depths, covered with those same geometric symbols, but massive, way bigger than anything we'd seen before. The staircase we'd explored yesterday wasn't a building. It was just the entrance to something that had been sleeping under the ocean floor for thousands of years. And now, it was waking up. The voices weren't coming from below anymore. They were all around us, speaking from the stone itself, welcoming us home in words that made my bones ache with familiarity. Dorothy was smiling now, her eyes reflecting the blue glow coming from the rising structure. "They're beautiful, aren't they? So much older and wiser than we are." The tower kept climbing, revealing level after level of strange architecture, and I realized we weren't just witnessing an archaeological discovery anymore. We were watching something return, something that had been waiting a very long time to take back the world. The tower kept climbing, showing more levels of that weird black stone design with each passing second. I watched in horrified fascination as staircases wound around the outside of the structure, leading to platforms and doorways that opened onto nothing but empty air. The whole thing broke every law of physics I'd ever learned. But there it was, rising from the gulf like some fever dream made real. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked Dorothy, who was still standing at the rail with that unsettling smile on her face. "Since 1987, she said without taking her eyes off the tower. "That's when they first spoke to me in the North Sea. Told me about the network, about how many sites would need to be opened simultaneously for them to return." The voices were changing now, moving from that old language to something I understood perfectly. Clear English words drifted up from the stone itself, speaking in dozens of different accents and dialects. "We learned from the others who came before," they said. "The drilling crews from 1952, from 1973, from all the times your people found us sleeping. We listened to their words, their thoughts, their dreams. We know your language now." Willie was backing toward the equipment shed, his grandfather's journal still gripped in his hands. "Stephen, we need to get everyone off this rig. Right now." Stephen jumped into action, yelling commands to our small crew. "Emergency evacuation protocols, everyone to the lifeboats." But Dorothy laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "The lifeboats won't start. I disabled the engines yesterday." "You what?" "They needed to make sure we'd be here for the awakening. It's an honor, really. We're witnessing the return of a civilization that predates human history." I stared at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. Her skin had a grayish tint I hadn't noticed before, and her eyes caught the blue glow from the tower in a way that seemed off. When she smiled, I saw teeth that were way too sharp. Way too many of them. "You're not human anymore, are you?" "I'm becoming something better. The process started 20 years ago, but it takes time. Each contact with their technology, each conversation with their voices, changes you a little more." She held up her hands, and I saw that her fingernails had grown into something resembling claws. "Soon I'll be able to join them properly." The tower was huge now, easily 200 feet above the water and still climbing. But worse than that, I could see other structures breaking the surface in the distance. Dark spires rising from the gulf in a rough circle around our rig, each one identical to the tower beside us. "How many sites?" I asked. 17 active drilling operations worldwide, all of them hitting the network at precisely the right depth over the past month. Dorothy's voice carried that hungry quality again, but stronger now. "They've been coordinating this return for decades, waiting for human technology to advance enough to reach them." Elaine's voice came through the deck speakers, crackling with static, but clear enough to understand. "I'm picking up signals from all over. Electromagnetic bursts from 17 different spots, all perfectly timed. It's like they're having a conversation." "Can you boost our communications?" Stephen called toward the comm room. "Working on it. If I reroute power through the rig's structural supports and use the metal framework as an antenna array, I might be able to punch through the interference." Willie flipped through his journal like crazy, stopping at pages covered in his grandfather's neat handwriting. "There's something here about stopping them. My grandfather wrote about symbols that could close the doorways." "What kind of symbols?" "Warning markers. Left by people who encountered these things before and managed to seal them away." Willie looked up from the journal, his face pale. "He drew them. Said they were carved into the stone around every site they found." I followed him to the edge of the drill hole, where the water was now shining so brightly it hurt to look at directly. But Willie was right. There were symbols carved into the metal casing around the hole's rim, fresh cuts in the steel that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "Someone carved these recently," I said. "Not someone. Something. They're trying to prevent us from using the old warnings." Willie traced one of the symbols with his finger. "But look here,"
This one's incomplete." He pulled out a small knife and began etching the pattern from his grandfather's journal into the steel. The second he finished the symbol, the blue glow from the water wavered. "It's working," I said. "Keep going." But Dorothy was moving toward us now, and her movements were wrong. Too smooth, like she was floating through air instead of walking. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. This is evolution. The next step for both our species." "Our species is fine the way it is," Stephen said, positioning himself between Dorothy and Willie. "Your species is children playing with tools you don't understand. They've been watching you develop for thousands of years, waiting for you to become advanced enough to be useful." The tower beside us shook and started going up faster, showing floor after floor of rooms and stairs that seemed to go on forever upward. And from each floor, I could hear voices calling out in perfect English, saying names I knew. "Stephen Castillo. We know about your brother. We can bring him back. Willie Payne. Your grandfather is waiting for you in the deep chambers. Paige Crawford. We have answers to every question you've ever asked about the Earth's hidden history." I felt something pulling at my thoughts, a draw toward the tower that felt almost real. Part of me wanted to walk over to the rail and just step off, let the water carry me down to those chambers where all the mysteries would finally make sense. "Don't listen to them," Willie said, still carving symbols into the steel. "My grandfather wrote about this. They promise you everything you want most, but it's not real." Elaine's voice crackled through the speakers again, much clearer this time. "I've got partial communications back, and I'm picking up signals from all 17 sites. The structures are coming up at the same time. It's a coordinated emergence." "Can you contact the Coast Guard?" "Trying, but the electromagnetic interference is massive. It's like the entire Gulf is one giant radio transmitter." I stared at the power distribution panel near the drill hole, an idea taking shape that frightened me nearly as much as the voices. "Elaine, what would happen if we overloaded the rig's electrical systems, created a massive electromagnetic pulse?" "It would fry every piece of equipment on board and probably kill the power grid for 50 miles. But would it disrupt their communications?" A pause. "Maybe, if the pulse was strong enough." Stephen caught on immediately. "You're talking about blowing up the rig." "I'm talking about stopping this before 17 ancient cities full of things that aren't quite human anymore break through to the surface." Willie finished carving the last symbol, and the blue glow from the water faded. The tower's climb slowed, and I heard something like anger in the voices calling from below. "The symbols are working," he said, "but I don't know how long they'll hold." Dorothy was closer now, and I could see her change happening faster. Her skin looked scaly, and when she spoke, her voice had strange layers to it, like the sound was coming from several different throats at once. "You're making a mistake," she said. "They're offering you knowledge beyond anything your species has ever imagined. The secrets of deep time, of technologies that could reshape your world. At what cost?" "The cost of remaining merely human." I made my decision. "Elaine, start routing all available power to the main electrical systems. Everything we've got. Paige, that's going to create a feedback loop that'll..." "I know what it'll do. Just trust me." Stephen was already moving toward the emergency controls. "All hands abandon ship. This is not a drill." But as he reached for the alarm, Dorothy moved faster than anything human should be able to move. She grabbed his wrist, and I saw frost form where her fingers touched his skin. "I can't let you interfere with their return," she said. Willie dropped his journal and tackled Dorothy, knocking her away from Stephen. They hit the deck hard, but Dorothy twisted in ways that made my eyes water, slipping out of Willie's grip like she was made of liquid. "Now, Elaine," I shouted. The rig's lights flickered, then blazed brighter than they should have been able to. Every piece of electrical equipment on board started buzzing with power it wasn't designed to handle. The electromagnetic pulse built like a wave, and I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. The voices from the tower cut off abruptly, replaced by something that might have been screaming. The blue glow from the water died, and the massive structure shuddered to a halt. Stephen hit the emergency alarm and the rig's evacuation protocols kicked in. Automated systems began lowering the lifeboats. Apparently, Dorothy hadn't been able to disable everything. "Move!" Stephen yelled. We sprinted toward the boats while the rig's electrical systems started blowing up all around us. Sparks rained down from every control panel, and the sharp stench of fried electronics choked the air. Behind us, the tower was dropping back into the water, its bizarre structure caving in on itself as the electromagnetic pulse messed with whatever power had been keeping it upright. But Dorothy's voice chased after us, no longer completely human, shouting from somewhere in the mayhem of sparks and dying machinery. "You've only delayed them," she said. 16 other sites are still active. They'll find another way. They always do." We made it to the lifeboats just as the rig's main power grid exploded in a shower of sparks that lit up the Gulf for miles. As we pulled away from the burning platform, I watched the tower sink beneath the waves, taking its twisted staircases and old promises with it. But in the distance, I could still see other dark spires rising from the water, and I knew Dorothy was right. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. The old ones had been patient for thousands of years. They could afford to wait a little longer.